Can you grab my phone and check the time? Emily asked, her voice casual as she rummaged through the fridge. I picked it up and tapped the screen to unlock it. My fingers hesitated as I began typing the letter D into the search bar. Before I could finish, an autocomplete suggestion popped up. Don't forget last night, it was amazing. And right next to it was a name I didn't recognize. Hey, what's taking so long? Emily called out, snapping me out of my daze. That was the moment I knew something wasn't right. Let me take you back to where it all started. Emily and I met during my final year in college. She was working as a server at a local cafe where I'd stop to grab coffee between classes. She had this effortless charm, big, expressive brown eyes, a smile that could light up the room, and a laugh that made you want to hear the punchline even if you didn't care about the joke. She was everything I didn't know I needed, spontaneous, witty, and endlessly supportive. We dated for 3 years before I proposed. By then, I was already climbing the corporate ladder, and Emily had transitioned into event planning, a job that fit her social butterfly nature perfectly. Life was good. We bought a modest home in the suburbs, adopted a dog named Milo, and talked about starting a family one day. But if I'm being honest, the cracks started to show a couple of years into the marriage. At first, it was little things that, in hindsight, should have raised a red flag. Emily began spending more time on her phone, scrolling endlessly, even during dinner. She'd laugh at messages but never tell me what was so funny. Just memes, she'd say with a dismissive wave when I asked. Her job as an event planner kept her busy, and I didn't think much of it when she started coming home later than usual. Clients are demanding, she'd say, her tone almost apologetic. I believed her because why wouldn't I? Trust was the foundation of our relationship, and I had no reason to doubt her. Then there was the way she started dressing. Emily had always taken pride in her appearance, but lately it felt different. She'd buy expensive lingerie and claim it was just for me. Yet I rarely saw her wear it. Her perfume collection doubled, and she started wearing scents I didn't recognize. I chalked it up to her evolving tastes, convincing myself that I was overthinking. After all, marriages go through phases, right? The turning point came about 6 months ago, when she started guarding her phone like it was the Holy Grail. She'd always been pretty open about her devices. We even knew each other's passwords. But suddenly, her phone was always face down, and she'd get defensive if I so much as glanced at the screen. You're being paranoid, she snapped one evening when I casually mentioned how secretive she'd become. Am I? I shot back, surprised by my own tone. She rolled her eyes and walked out of the room, leaving me to stew in my frustration. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself that I was overreacting. But the unease grew. It wasn't just the phone, it was her entire demeanor. She seemed distracted, distant, like her mind was always somewhere else. There was also the way she started criticizing me, small jabs disguised as jokes. Maybe you should hit the gym more, she said one night, laughing as if it were harmless banter. I wasn't out of shape, but her comment stung. I started noticing patterns. She'd spend more time in the bathroom, sometimes with her phone, and come out smiling to herself. Her girls' nights became more frequent, and she'd come home smelling like alcohol and something I couldn't quite place, something that didn't belong to her usual routine. It wasn't just me noticing the change. Our mutual friends commented on how Emily seemed more vibrant, more alive, but always when I wasn't around. She's just been really busy with work, I'd explain, even though I wasn't sure if I believed it myself. Deep down, I knew something was off, but I didn't want to admit it. I told myself that every marriage goes through rough patches and that I was being insecure. I started working longer hours to distract myself, but that only seemed to push us further apart. The tension reached a boiling point one night when I found myself staring at her while she was texting someone. She didn't notice. She was too engrossed in her conversation, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. Who's that? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Just work stuff, she replied without looking up. But it wasn't just work stuff. I could feel it in my gut. Still, I didn't press the issue. I told myself that I was imagining things, that I was projecting my own insecurities onto her. After all, Emily was my wife, the woman who'd stood by me through thick and thin. She wouldn't betray me, right? Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts sooner. But at the time, I was too afraid to confront the possibility that the woman I loved might be hiding something from me. And that's how I found myself in the middle of a seemingly normal evening, holding her phone in my hand, staring at a message that would change everything. The night it all started unraveling felt ordinary enough. Emily had asked me to grab her phone and check the time while she prepped a late dinner in the kitchen. Her voice was light and casual, as though nothing was amiss, and I didn't think twice about picking it up. Her phone was unlocked, a rare occurrence these days. I tapped the search bar, planning to look up the recipe she mentioned earlier, when I typed the letter D. The autocomplete suggestions popped up instantly, and my eyes zeroed in on the first one. Don't forget last night, it was amazing. My stomach dropped. The suggestion sat there like a taunt, mocking my ignorance. And right below it, the name. Derek. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. I couldn't think straight. Derek? Who the hell was Derek? The name didn't belong to anyone I knew, none of her coworkers, friends, or clients. And what was this about last night? Hey, what's taking so long? Emily's voice jolted me back to reality. I locked the phone quickly, trying to mask the panic that must have been written all over my face. Sorry, got distracted, I mumbled, handing it back to her. She glanced at me briefly, her brow furrowing for a split second before returning to her task. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. I couldn't focus on anything Emily was saying. My mind was stuck on that autocomplete suggestion, replaying it over and over like a broken record. When she finally went to bed, I stayed up, claiming I had some work to finish. Instead, I sat in the living room, staring blankly at the TV, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a joke? A misunderstanding? Maybe Derek was a coworker, and the message was taken out of context. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to jump to conclusions without evidence, so I began observing her behavior more closely. It didn't take long for the patterns to become glaringly obvious. Emily was always on her phone, but now, I noticed how quickly she'd put it down when I entered the room. Her late meetings were becoming more frequent, and her excuses more rehearsed. One evening, I decided to test the waters. How was work today? I asked as casually as I could while we ate dinner. Busy, she replied without missing a beat. The client's wedding is next week, and there being a nightmare about last-minute changes. Must be stressful, I said, watching her closely. She nodded, not meeting my gaze. Yeah, but it's part of the job. Her explanation sounded plausible enough, but her tone was too smooth, too practiced. I could tell she was hiding something. A few days later, I got my first piece of concrete evidence. Emily had left her phone charging on the kitchen counter while she went to take a shower. It was locked, of course, but the screen lit up with a notification. Derek, can't stop thinking about you. My blood ran cold. I stared at the message, half hoping I'd misread it. But there it was, clear as day. Derek. The same name from the autocomplete suggestion. My hands trembled as I fought the urge to unlock her phone and read more. I didn't know her new passcode, and I didn't want to risk getting caught. When she came back downstairs, I acted like nothing had happened, but inside, I was boiling with rage and confusion. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? Over the next week, I started digging deeper. I checked our phone bill, looking for patterns. Sure enough, there were dozens of texts and calls to a number I didn't recognize, always during her late meetings or girls' nights. I even followed her once, feeling equal parts ashamed and desperate. She told me she was meeting her friends at a wine bar downtown, but instead, she drove to a quiet residential neighborhood and parked outside a house I didn't recognize. I waited in my car, heart pounding, as I watched her knock on the door. A man answered, a tall guy with dark hair and an easy smile. He greeted her with a hug that lasted a little too long to be platonic. They went inside, and the door closed behind them. I sat there for what felt like hours, debating whether to storm in and demand answers or drive away and pretend I hadn't seen anything. In the end, I left. I wasn't ready to confront her, not yet. Instead, I spent the next few days gathering more evidence. I went through her emails, social media accounts, and anything else I could access without raising suspicion. The pieces started falling into place, and the picture they painted was worse than I'd imagined. Emily wasn't just having an affair, she was living a double life. There were messages, photos, even receipts for expensive dinners and hotel stays, all with Derek. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The woman I'd loved and trusted was lying to my face, sneaking around behind my back, and building a life with someone else. I felt a mix of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. How could she do this to me? To us? But I knew I couldn't confront her until I had everything. I needed to be sure, to have all the evidence laid out so she couldn't deny it or twist the truth. And so I waited, playing the role of the oblivious husband while I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I had spent the past week collecting every shred of evidence I could find, and by the time Friday rolled around, I was ready. Ready to confront Emily, to demand answers, to finally put an end to the gnawing doubt that had consumed me. That evening, she came home later than usual, carrying a bottle of wine and humming to herself. She looked carefree, almost glowing, and it made my stomach turn. Was it Derek who put that smile on her face? "Hey, you're home early," she said, setting the wine on the counter. "Rough day?" "Something like that," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. She didn't seem to notice my tension. Instead, she opened the wine and poured herself a glass, offering me one, which I declined. We sat in the living room, and I watched her sip her wine, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. My heart pounded in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Emily," I said finally, breaking the silence. She looked up, her expression curious. "Yeah? There's something we need to talk about." Her brow furrowed, and she set her glass down. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "Who's Derek?" Her reaction was subtle but telling. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second before she quickly masked it with a laugh. "Derek? What are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I said, my voice firm. "I've seen the messages, Emily. I know about the calls, the texts, the meetups. I know everything." Her face went pale, and for a moment she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, just as quickly, she recovered, crossing her arms and leaning back in her chair. "You've been snooping through my phone?" she accused, her tone sharp. "This isn't about me, Emily," I shot back. "This is about you lying to me, sneaking around, and having an affair with some guy named Derek." She rolled her eyes, her expression shifting to one of irritation. "You're being ridiculous. Derek is just a friend from work. There's nothing going on." "Really?" I said, pulling out my phone. I opened the folder where I'd saved screenshots of her messages, call logs, and even a photo of her and Derek embracing outside his house. I handed it to her. "Care to explain this?" Her face went from defiant to panicked in an instant. She stared at the evidence, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to find the right words. "It's not what it looks like," she said finally, her voice trembling. "Then tell me what it is," I demanded, my voice rising. She hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through her hair. "Fine," she said, her tone defensive. "We've been seeing each other. But it's not serious. It's just something I needed." "Something you needed?" I repeated, incredulous. "What the hell does that even mean, Emily? We're married. I'm your husband. You don't need someone else." She groaned, her frustration evident. "You don't get it, do you? You've been so distant lately, so wrapped up in your work." I felt neglected. I stared at her, my anger boiling over. Neglected? You think that justifies cheating on me? If you felt neglected, you should have talked to me, not gone behind my back and started sleeping with someone else. It's not that simple, she snapped. You don't understand how lonely I've been. And you think I haven't been lonely? I shot back. Do you think I haven't noticed how you've been pulling away? How you're always on your phone, always working late? I've been trying to hold this marriage together while you've been out there screwing around with Derek. She flinched at my words but didn't respond. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. For a moment I thought she was crying, but when she looked up, there were no tears, only anger. Fine, she said coldly. You want the truth? Yes, I've been seeing Derek. And you know what? He makes me feel alive in a way you haven't in years. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt like the wind had been knocked out of me, but I forced myself to stay composed. Then why are you still here? I asked, my voice low. If Derek is so great, why haven't you left me? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked away, her expression unreadable. Because I don't know, she admitted finally. I don't know what I want. Her response was like a slap in the face. After everything she'd done, she didn't even have the decency to be honest about her intentions. I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. Well, I know what I want, I said. I want a wife who respects me, who doesn't lie to me, and who doesn't cheat on me. Clearly, that's not you. She looked up at me, her eyes wide. Wait, what are you saying? I'm saying I'm done, Emily, I said, my voice firm. I'm done being your backup plan, your safety net. If Derek is what you want, then go to him. But don't expect me to stick around while you figure it out. Her expression shifted from shock to desperation. You don't mean that, she said, standing up and reaching for me. We can fix this. I'll end things with Derek. I'll do whatever it takes. It's too late for that, I interrupted, stepping back. You've already made your choice, Emily. Now I'm making mine. She opened her mouth to argue, but I didn't give her the chance. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing there in stunned silence. As I got in my car and drove away, a strange sense of relief washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I wasn't going to let her betrayal define me. It was time to take control of my life and move forward, without Emily. When I left the house that night, I felt a mix of emotions so intense it was hard to untangle them. Anger, betrayal, sadness, disbelief, they all swirled together in my chest, making it hard to breathe. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove aimlessly through the city, the glow of streetlights blurring in my vision. How had it come to this? I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, dissecting every word Emily had said, every lie she had told. She didn't even try to deny it, not really. And her excuses, how could she justify what she'd done by blaming me? I ended up parking in an empty lot near a park I used to visit as a kid. The silence of the night was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the dashboard, trying to make sense of the chaos in my mind. Part of me wanted to scream, to punch something, to let out all the anger that was building inside me. But another part of me felt numb, like I was floating outside my body, watching my life fall apart from a distance. The sadness hit me next, creeping in like a fog. I thought about the good times Emily and I had shared, the laughter, the late-night talks, the dreams we had for our future. Were all those moments a lie? Had she been unhappy all along, or was this something new? I couldn't help but wonder if I'd failed her somehow. She had accused me of being distant, of neglecting her. Was she right? Had I been so focused on work, on providing for us, that I'd missed the signs? But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the anger. Even if I had been distant, it didn't excuse what she'd done. She had a choice. She could have talked to me, told me how she was feeling. Instead, she chose to lie, to betray me, to share herself with someone else. The thought of her with Derek made my stomach turn. I pictured them together, laughing, touching, sharing secrets. Did she talk about me? Did she compare us? Was he better than me in her eyes? I shook my head, trying to push the thoughts away, but they kept coming, relentless and unforgiving. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of questions I'd never get answers to. Eventually, I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through old photos of us. There was one from our honeymoon, Emily's smile bright and genuine as we stood on the beach, the ocean stretching out behind us. Looking at it now, it felt like I was staring at a stranger. I wondered if she was thinking about me, if she regretted what she'd done, or if she was texting Derek, telling him about the fight and making plans to see him again. The thought made my blood boil. I called my best friend, Mark, needing someone to talk to. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey man, what's up?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "Emily's been cheating on me," I said bluntly, the words tasting bitter in my mouth. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," I replied, my voice cracking. "I caught her. She didn't even deny it. Jesus, dude. I'm so sorry." We talked for a while, and Mark let me vent, his voice calm and reassuring. He didn't try to offer solutions or tell me what to do. He just listened, and for that, I was grateful. By the time I hung up, I felt a little less alone, but the pain was still there, gnawing at me. I knew this wasn't something I could just get over. It was going to take time, maybe a long time. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. I stayed at a hotel, not ready to face Emily again, but I couldn't escape the memories that haunted me. Everywhere I went, I was reminded of her, of us. The mornings were the worst. I'd wake up and, for a split second, forget everything. Then it would hit me like a freight train, and the weight of it all would come crashing down. I tried to keep busy, throwing myself into work and spending time with friends, but the emptiness was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. Nights were no better. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation over and over in my mind. I thought about all the signs I'd missed, all the moments I could have done something differently. But as the days turned into weeks, something started to shift. The sadness didn't go away, but it became less overwhelming. The anger didn't burn as hot. I started to realize that what Emily had done wasn't a reflection of me. It was a reflection of her. I wasn't perfect, but I had tried. I had loved her, trusted her, and given her everything I could. She was the one who had thrown it all away. That realization was both painful and freeing. It didn't make the hurt disappear, but it gave me a sense of clarity. I couldn't control what Emily had done, but I could control how I responded to it. I decided to start seeing a therapist, someone who could help me process everything and figure out how to move forward. It wasn't easy to open up, but it felt good to have someone listen without judgment. Through it all, I learned a lot about myself, about my strengths, my flaws, and what I wanted out of life. I realized that I deserved better than someone who would lie and cheat. I deserved honesty, respect, and love. Emily had broken my heart, but she hadn't broken me. I was still standing, still fighting, still moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The weeks following the confrontation were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, decisions, and painful realizations. Emily tried to reach out multiple times, but I ignored her calls and texts. I needed space to think, to figure out what I wanted and what was best for me. She left me voicemails that ranged from apologetic to defensive. In one, she begged me to come home so we could fix things. In another, she accused me of overreacting, saying that everyone makes mistakes. Hearing her justify her betrayal only reinforced my resolve to take my time before making any decisions. I couldn't bring myself to return to the house right away, so I stayed at the hotel for another week. Mark came over often, bringing beer and pizza, and we talked late into the night about everything, my feelings, my fears, my future. One evening, I decided it was time to go back home, not to reconcile with Emily, but to face the reality of what had happened. I wanted to reclaim my space, my life, and my dignity. When I arrived, the house felt foreign, almost unrecognizable. The pictures on the walls, the furniture we had picked out together, the little knickknacks we'd collected over the years, all of it seemed tainted now. Emily was there, sitting on the couch, her face pale and her eyes puffy from crying. She looked up when I walked in, her expression a mix of hope and fear. "Ryan," she said softly, standing up. I held up a hand to stop her. "Don't," I said, my voice firm. "I'm not here to talk about us. I'm here to figure out how to move forward." Her face crumpled, but she nodded, sitting back down. We spent the next hour discussing logistics: who would stay in the house, how we would divide our finances, and what the next steps would be. Emily insisted that she wanted to go to counseling, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice trembling. "But I love you, Ryan. I don't want to lose you." Her words might have moved me once, but now they felt hollow. Love wasn't supposed to hurt like this. It wasn't supposed to be full of lies and betrayal. "I can't do this, Emily," I said finally. "I can't pretend like things can go back to the way they were. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She started crying, pleading with me to reconsider, but I stayed firm. I knew that staying in this marriage would only prolong the pain and resentment. Over the next few weeks, we began the process of separating. I found a lawyer and started filing for divorce. It was painful and messy, but it was also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was taking control of my life. Emily moved out of the house and stayed with a friend while I began the daunting task of rebuilding. I redecorated, replacing the things that reminded me of her with items that felt like mine. I started going out more, reconnecting with old friends, and even joining a local hiking group. Through it all, I leaned on the support of my friends and therapist. They reminded me that healing wasn't linear, that it was okay to have good days and bad days. One day, as I was cleaning out a drawer, I found an old letter Emily had written me during our first anniversary. In it, she had talked about how much she loved me, how excited she was for our future together. Reading it now felt surreal, like it had been written by someone else entirely. I realized then that the woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. And while that hurt, it also gave me closure. I could finally let go of the past and focus on building a future that was mine alone. Months later, the divorce was finalized. Emily and I went our separate ways, and while I still felt the sting of betrayal, I also felt a sense of peace. In the end, I knew I had made the right decision. Staying in a broken marriage would have only prolonged the pain. By walking away, I had given myself the chance to heal, to grow, and to find happiness again. I wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to find out. It's been nearly a year since I walked out of that house and left my marriage behind. Looking back, it feels like a different lifetime, a version of myself I hardly recognize. The wounds Emily's betrayal left behind haven't entirely healed, but they've scarred over, a reminder of what I endured and how far I've come. In the beginning, I struggled with self-doubt. I questioned my worth, replayed every moment of our relationship, and wondered if I could have done something to prevent it. But over time, I've come to realize that what happened wasn't about me. It was about her choices, her flaws, and her inability to face her problems head-on. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is the importance of self-respect. When Emily tried to blame me for her actions, I almost let her. I almost carried the weight of her betrayal as if it were my fault. But I know now that I deserved better. I deserved honesty, loyalty, and someone who valued me enough to fight for our relationship instead of running to someone else. I've also learned to trust myself again. For a long time, I doubted my instincts, wondering how I could have missed the signs. But I've realized that love can blind us, and trusting someone isn't a flaw, it's a strength. It's a risk we take when we let someone into our hearts, and sometimes, that risk doesn't pay off. But it doesn't mean we should stop trusting altogether. These days, I focus on the things that bring me joy and fulfillment. I've taken up hiking more seriously, spending weekends exploring trails and soaking in the beauty of nature. It's become a form of therapy for me, a way to clear my mind and remind myself that there's still so much good in the world. I've also reconnected with people I lost touch with during my marriage. Friendships that had faded over time have been rekindled, and I've found an incredible support system in those who stood by me when everything fell apart. As for Emily, we've had minimal contact since the divorce was finalized. I don't harbor the same anger I once did, but I don't think I'll ever truly forgive her. Forgiveness, I've learned, isn't something you owe someone, it's something you give when it feels right. And in this case, I'm not there yet, and that's okay. If there's one piece of advice I could offer to anyone reading this, it's this: don't settle for less than you deserve. If someone shows you who they really are, believe them. Love isn't about excuses or justifications, it's about actions, commitment, and respect. Walking away from my marriage was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the best decision I could have made for myself. It wasn't just about leaving Emily, it was about choosing me. Now, as I stand on the other side of the pain, I feel stronger, wiser, and more grounded. I know who I am, what I want, and what I'll never tolerate again. Betrayal may have shattered my past, but it didn't define my future. The road ahead is mine to carve out, and for the first time in a long time, I'm looking forward to the journey. Leave a comment with your thoughts on the story, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss new interesting stories. See you soon.